Hello everyone, and welcome to this exciting and exclusive webcast by the Ethical Hacker Network, a free online magazine for security professionals. I'm Don, the editor-in-chief and your host for the day. As a reminder, the video of this webcast and the slide deck will both be made available on EHNet, so yes, we are recording, and even those who are not in attendance will be notified by email in a couple weeks when we get it going. So even if they haven't attended, they will be notified as well. So, let's just start things off with the now obvious subject of the webcast, as described as you can now see on the title on your screen. If you haven't followed the conversation in the Twitterverse or seen the Rapid7 press release, this webcast is not just covering an updated version of Metasploit, but rather a new major release, which is version 4. And with HD as our presenter, it's not going to be a bunch of marketing fluff. His presentation will go for about an hour, and then we'll jump right into the Q&A for as long as we can keep him. And with that, let's move right ahead and introduce our speaker for the day. Most of you know the poster child of the professional or ethical hacking world. For those of you who are new to our industry, H.D. Moore is the founder of the Metasploit project, which was back in the summer of 2003. He is now the Chief Security Officer at Rapid7 and remains as Chief Architect of Metasploit. And for those of you who haven't heard him speak at all, then all I can say is that you're lucky that we're recording this today. Because unless he's broken into that case of wine I sent him to slow him down a little bit, then you'll probably need to go back and play this one a few times just to catch some of those nuggets he throws out there. Either way, we're in for a great treat today because he's going to give a lot of demos. You're actually going to see the product in action, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But before I give the floor to HD, we want to get to know you a little bit, so we're going to do a couple polls right now. So let me go over here. And so the first poll that you should start seeing on your, here we go, should start seeing on your screens is, do you use any version of Metasploit, or have you been using it? How are you using it? Are you using it daily, every now and then? Yes, but it's been a while. Okay, we see a number of people have voted, and it looks as though the top two winners are, the top one is yes every now and then yes daily. So that's good. We get to quick little idea of who's using it. Now let's go to the next poll. How do you use Metasploit? So are you a consultant? Are you part of a red team? Are you just an InfoSec professional? Or are you using it for educational purpose or for other? Now, it looks as though nearly half of you are using it as an InfoSec professional, which is cool. Coming in a close second is a consultant at 20%. And then we can also see that at about 19% you're using it for educational purposes. And then 7% for other and 6% for red team. All right, well, that's good. Most people have voted in the polls. And so that kind of gives us a good idea of who our audience is, and so HD can kind of address that as we move forward. So without further ado, let me hand it over to HD, and I will let him take the show from here.
Great, thanks, Don. Hopefully you can see the screen okay. And let's give folks a second here to sync, and here we go. So this presentation is really about Metasploit 4.0. I'm going to try to keep the slides short, down to about 10-15 minutes at the most, and give a lot of time for demos and questions. This is a release that we've basically been working on for about 5 years. The 3.0 release was kind of the first major change from the old structure of the Perl format to Ruby, and since then we've been working towards what we finally delivered as part of this release. So we're really excited about this. This has been something that has been a long haul to get here, both in terms of just getting the code base in line and getting things where we want them to be, but also in terms of just the rest of the industry kind of catching up to where we see pen testing is going. So it's interesting that we're actually starting to see a convergence between the vision we've had all along and what's actually happening now in the real world in actual enterprises. So for us, this is a very exciting release. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. for folks who don't know me, I'm the Chief Security Officer of Rapid7, but I'm also the architect of the Metasploit framework. I started the project basically late 2002, early 2003. The first release was back in 2003. So I've basically been doing this as my hobby for about 8 years now, and now it's also my job, which is nice. This presentation is mostly focused on Metasploit Pro because that's where you can see all the new shiny widgets. But nearly, 90%, 95% of our actual development is going into the open source tree. So even though we're showing off a lot of really fancy new stuff inside the Metasploit Pro interface, all the individual widgets and most of the individual bits of functionality and features actually live inside the open source code. Just like always, every exploit you see in Metasploit Pro is the exact same exploit you'll see in the free version of the product. And part of the open source trees, you can go through and look at the code, look at the exploits yourself. So even though Metasploit Pro does pay our bills, we really are still deeply engaged with open source and really spending most of our time on the open source development side. Before I keep things off too much, we actually have a conference coming up. The Rapid7 is helping sponsor and getting off the ground. This is the 2011 United Security Summit at the Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. We're trying to take a different approach to security conferences instead of just yet another HackerCon or yet another corporate security con. We're trying to find a way to let people who work in the industry, both as individual consultants, individual contributors, open source, enterprise products, all collaborate together and try to find the best solutions to the problems we have. So if you're interested in that type of conference that's a little bit less corporate-y, a little bit less schmoozy, a little bit less hackery, but very focused on actually coming up with solutions to the problems. United Summit is the conference name, unitedsummit.org, and I think the early bird rate expires on August 4th, so if you're interested, take a look sooner versus later. And without any further ado, I'll go straight to the Metasploit bit. So if you look at the Metasploit framework over the last 8 years, it's gone through some pretty significant changes. Back in 2003, the initial release only had 11 exploits in the framework. At the time, it was kind of a silly little Perl curses game and didn't really count for much. Fast forward to 2004, and that's when we had the second developer actually join the project. That was Spoonham, and we're up to 18 exploits. So we thought we're hot stuff at that time because we had 18 exploits in our toolkit. Fast forward all the way to 2007, we're up to 177 exploits at the first launch of Metasploit 3.0. Now, given that history, the growth rate just isn't really that high. If you look at how fast we've gone from 2007 to 2011 of going from 177 exploits all the way to 716 exploits as of this morning, and that's not including your 360 auxiliary modules, your 226 payloads, all your new post-exploitation modules that are entirely separate. Through the course of the project, just the code that's represented in Metasploit 4 today has commits and references from at least 389 different module authors. So this project is gigantic. A couple days ago, some folks were asking me for stats on Twitter and how many people are using the project, things like that. We try not to give away too much information about our user base, but we can definitely say that we've had over 1 million unique IPs download Metasploit in the last 12 months. Our kind of hardcore user base, the folks who use it constantly, that's right around 150,000. And we love our users, we love our contributors, and that's why we're so focused on open source. That's what makes us great. So if you look at the code base over basically 2006 to 2011, you can see a massive spike here right around 2010. This is what happens when you actually have commercial sponsorship through your project. So for folks who are working on an open source project and you're curious how difficult or how this would change your momentum, you can see it almost just doubled our growth rate going forward. We wouldn't be able to get here without Rapid7 without having these commercial products to help kind of fund the development and fund our hiring. So while I'm going to talk about commercial products today, this is really about making the open source product better and kind of solving our core mission of making exploit information available and providing the tools you need to actually do your job as a security consultant or IT professional. On the commit side, this is kind of funny. I was going through some of the SVN stats, and one thing that always jumps out is the giant spike of commit work that happens every single August. As all the stuff that people talk about at Black Hat, at DEF CON, at B-Sides, they finally integrate all their code back into the Metasploit framework again. So you can see this huge spike right here in August as all the code that people talk about at these conferences finally comes back into the framework and goes back down again. So it was kind of a fun stat. So some quick highlights about Metasploit 4 before we go too deep. A lot of the stuff applies to the Pro Edition, of course, because that's our flagship product. But little bits in that, like the RPC API, the XML format, that actually applies to the open source product as well. So nearly everything here is rooted in the open source framework in some piece. So to start off with, we redid the user interface of the product. The one we had before, to be honest, our developers are tired of looking at, so I decided to change it. But we think we've really made some big improvements to the workflow, to the UI, to the way people use the product that just makes more sense. This major focus of this release has been around integrations. It's about how do we work with other products, how do we import data from other products, how do we make it so that when you're using Metasploit in your environment, it actually works with all the tools you use. And some of that's by importing data from other tools, some of that's exporting data back out to other tools. The one thing that was really missing before this release was a stable API to call the product remotely. So as of this release, we actually have the ability to, remotely control any Metasploit Pro instance anywhere. If you start tying this into the rest of the features we added, it gets really powerful. We can bring up new instances, with the drop of a hat, mass exploit a network, bring it back down again, suck the data back out, and so on. So there's a lot of really cool things you can do with the integration standpoint. We've actually documented our XML format, which is amazing. So we actually have a standardized format we can use going forward for anybody who wants to import our data. And we've got tons of documentation. This is the first release that we've actually spent not just tech writer money getting all of our, official product documentation done, but we're doing the same effort right now in the open source documentation as well. So the goal is to really have a solid set of documentation, because that's been the #1 complaint for most of our users, is that the code changes so fast, documentation always goes out of date. Even David Kennedy and company's book that was released just a couple of days ago, there's already a couple little things that are already starting to change, and they were the most persistent in making sure the book always reflects the changes. So documentation is really important. We're finally stepping up and putting as much effort into our open source documentation as we are to everything else we do. So I know everyone hates talking about clouds because they're silly, but we actually have the ability to deploy into open source clouds, private clouds and public clouds via VMware, via Amazon. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. That was mostly driven by customer demand for how they wanted to deploy the product. On the Metasploit Pro side, one thing you could do in Metasploit Framework, for a long time, if you spent a little bit of time about it, was building in your own, persistent agents, building in your own connect back systems. But due to all sorts of different issues, you generally had to write it yourself. With Metasploit Pro, you can now install persistent agents. They'll connect back automatically. You can set up persistent listeners for integrating with other copies of Metasploit or with other tools that can actually run Metasploit payloads. So you want to integrate with SET, that's a great way to do that. We have a full-blown macro engine built into the back of Metasploit Pro now, so you can actually chain together different post-exploit automation actions. And on the payload side, we have HTTPS and HTTP transports now, and those use your authentication settings to shoot right out your corporate firewall, looking like any other traffic. So we'll talk more about this stuff as we go forward. The next major area we focused on was updating all of our brute force work. That was adding various limiters, so you can say, only try this user account 3 times, only try this particular service 10 times, only spend 2 minutes per service, all sorts of great controls to specify exactly how you want to do your brute force attack. Metasploit Pro is probably unique in the pen test product world in that it's very focused on not just brute forcing passwords that are weak, but also replaying passwords that has compromised one machine against other machines. That's really been the biggest win for a lot of our customers. There's a screenshot flying around Twitter a few days ago of one of our customers with 1,100 shells on the local network, only because they popped one machine that's missing patches. And from that machine, they dumped the admin hash. Once you get the admin hash, you exploit everything else. And Metasploit Pro is really designed for that type of work. In addition to the various limiters and the pass the hash functionality, we've got a whole new set of mutators in for the word list. You can do, John the Ripper style rules of actually mutating various word lists, converting things to leet speak, things like that. We support much bigger word lists as well. And for anyone who saw our sponsorship of the John the Ripper project, we actually have direct integration with Metasploit now. So anytime you dump password hashes inside Metasploit Pro, we'll automatically bring them down to the local system, seed the word list from any data you may already have, and then try to do a really quick crack on that using a bunch of word list expansion rules. So it shouldn't take more than a minute or two every time you do it, but it's a very quick way to turn all of your NTLM and layman hashes into plaintext hashes you can then replay. One thing that a lot of our Asian customers and Asian users have run into problems with is running the product on multi-language platforms. We still don't have full, UTF-8 support from top to back, but what we do have support for right now is the ability to actually install on all these platforms that have multi-byte languages, and the ability to actually compromise the system. So I'll show you a demo a little bit later about actually compromising a Korean version of Windows XP, and everything just works the way you expect it would. So we had tweaked a couple things here and there, improved fingerprinting, things like that, but it's one of our focus points for this release. Finally, the boring stuff or the exciting stuff, depending on who you are, the reporting side has gone through a huge overhaul. We now have charts and graphs, we have all the fancy pretty pictures everywhere. We've got some graphs that we think are not just pretty pictures, but actually useful in terms of what they represent. And for folks who work in the government area, we've got a FISBA compliance report now that helps as well. This release was just gigantic. The team really hasn't slept much in 3 months. but we're almost done, and we're on track. So we're about 120 unique features overall. We're not going to talk about all of them, of course, but we're going to talk about some of the highlights. So the first thing I'm going to jump into a little bit deeper is the integration side. We actually have an official remote API now through this custom RPC protocol. We went through and reviewed all the various standard RPC transports out there, things like XML RPC, things like REST support, SOAP, JSON, etc. And to be frank, they all suck. They don't solve the need. They're all really tough to transport binary data. They're all terrible performance. The protocol coverage is really great. The language support is kind of all of them out, depending on which tools you use. And in general, these quote-unquote standards-compliant RPC APIs just don't cut it. Instead, we found a library called MessagePack, which does very quick binary serialization of data, and it's safe to call. There's plugins for tons of languages. And the best thing about that is you can transfer large amounts of data in binary form over the protocol without having to use a secondary transport for things like downloads and uploads. Anyway, so going way too nerdy on this, but the idea here is we've got a really, really fast API. Prior to Metasploit 4, you can only do about 1 or 2 API calls per second inside Metasploit RPC daemon. With the new code, you can do about 350 per second. So it's just a huge increase in speed and efficiency as far as that goes. We actually already pushed out the Ruby gem as the client, so if you want to do gem install on the RPC client, you can actually start playing with the client already, and there's a couple examples available for driving the Metasploit Pro product through that. We have official XML data export, which includes the documentation, which will be released next week as well, and that defines kind of how you take data out of Metasploit. Now, the great thing about this is it applies to all 3 editions of the product. You can do an export from Framework, from Express, from Pro, and you can import it back into any of those 3 products as well. So if you have a couple users using Pro, a couple users using the Framework, a couple people using Express, they can all export their data and import the data just fine between all those installations. So once we have the official documentation published, we now have kind of a standards-compliant way to transfer data in and out of Metasploit, and that includes all the various sub-elements from host to notes to boot to everything else in between. One big push this release was getting all of our import filters added. We added import filters for a whole bunch of different vulnerability assessment products to pull vulnerability data into the system, but we also added support for importing data directly from web application scanning products as well. So now you can pull in data from AppScan, you can pull data from Acunetics, you can pull data from NetSparker, and all that data, including the web pages, the raw data, all shows up now within Metasploit Pro and allows you to do things like auditing and exploitation of that data. One thing that I thought was a little bit funny that was we added last night actually was the ability to migrate directly from Core Impact to Metasploit Pro. So you can actually export your project in Core Impact, import it into Metasploit Pro, and keep doing your pen test. Theoretically faster, better, stronger, but that's my opinion. One thing that we've been working on for a long time on the background is doing better integration with Rapid7's Nexpose vulnerability management product. There's a lot of great ways to do integration. We've been trying to keep the 2 different functionality bits separate. So your VA is your VA and your pen test is your pen test, but you always want to bring data back and forth. So what we came up with is the way to actually directly tie Metasploit Pro into a running Nexpose instance. So you can go through and pull data directly out of any existing Nexpose site. You can then import data from any of those sites immediately. You can run scans using any one of those scanners you've configured. It really turns the Nexpose console into more of an engine that Metasploit Pro can use to go gather data automatically. It's a much cleaner integration than you might have seen before. One big announcement, and the press releases haven't gone out yet, but I want to touch on it real quick, is Nitro, which provides a SIEM product. Is the first vendor that I know of to actually do full integration with a pen test product. So they're actually bringing in pen test data from Metasploit Pro using the XML format directly into their SIEM product. If you want to see a live demo of how this works and how they're actually using that information and all the various things they can infer from that exploitation data inside the SIM, you can go to their Black Hat booth. It's like booth 409 next week at Black Hat. And a quick screenshot of what that looks like. So we're excited about this. This is the first time the SIEM, however you want to say it, vendors have really stepped forward and recognized that pen test data is just as applicable to the security of the organization as all the other data sources coming in. So quick example of the Nitro View console here showing integration, but it's pretty exciting for us. We think this is kind of the future of where pen test is going outside of just a kind of niche field where people do it now and again and bring it more towards regular testing and regular integration with other products. Now, before we talked about public and private clouds, instead of trying to explain what a cloud is, the easiest way to say this is we have prepackaged images now for VMware vSphere. So if you want to do an OVF deployment directly to your vSphere cluster, it's instantaneous. It's easy. You can actually deploy a Metasploit Pro instance directly from a public URL. It'll suck down an image, bring it online, and you're good to go in about 20 seconds. On the same side, you can do that through Amazon now, through EC2 AMI image. The AMI actually allows you to bring up Metasploit Pro instance almost immediately, provision it, configure the licensing, the passwords, all that fun stuff, and go from there. Now, where this stuff gets really cool is when you start combining this with XML data format, with RPC API, with all the various automation stuff we're doing in the back end. You can literally run one shell script that'll bring up a new Metasploit Pro instance in the cloud, NAS own some network, pull all the data back down after you're done compromising that network automatically, suck it into your local copy of Metasploit, and then bring the instance back down again. So if you're doing social engineering engagements where people keep blacklisting your IP addresses and things like that, it's a great way to just use these disposable EC2 IPs or elastic IPs or non-elastic IPs to launch your pen test and get your data back out. On the automation side, we've done a lot of work on the payloads, the persistent agents, the macros, all this other stuff to really make large-scale pen testing much easier. When we first started working on Metasploit Pro, we figured the common use case would be around 200 to 300 systems for a particular pen test. As in your admin, your consultant, whoever was would basically dial down a list of machines that they wanted to focus on and target just that small set of machines for the pen test. What we're finding is that people are actually taking in their entire vulnerability assessment data for an entire organization, 10,000 machines, 15,000 machines, and bringing it all into Metasploit Pro and trying to compromise all the machines at once. We think that's great, but we found really the sweet spot there is about 1,000 nodes, and we're really tuning a lot of our backend to really easily handle 1,000 node pen tests all at once very easily, from password testing to password replay to exploitation and everything else. So because of this kind of change in focus and the demands from customers, we've really focused on large-scale automation, large-scale support, thousands of sessions, things like that. When you're attacking mobile users or users who are on various mobile networks, whether it's 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, one of the biggest problems is that if the connection drops between you and the target after you've successfully compromised it through social engineering, you're basically done. You don't have a way back in. So we've got a couple ways to solve that. First was we actually added the ability to install a persistent agent directly through Pro, so you can automatically go through and install an agent when a client connects in. And you do that by creating a macro that installs the agent automatically through the macro action. The second thing is we've got a new payload type, or really two new payloads, which are reverse HTTP and reverse HTTPS. You may have already seen the blog post for this on the Metasploit blog. The idea is that instead of these things having a persistent connection back to the Metasploit console, instead of doing HTTP post requests, completely disconnected using all the authentication settings that are available within Windows to the user, and basically transparently authenticating out through the proxy to talk to the Metasploit instance. The great thing about this is that the user's network drops for some reason. For example, they disconnect, or they're offline for a little while, or for some reason you lose connectivity to the target. As soon as they come back online, they'll automatically reconnect. And all those settings are configurable, so you can specify, how many seconds before it automatically kills the connection, how many seconds before it gives up on the payload side. All those various connections are basically parameters are very easy to change. One of the challenges with having these types of persistent connections and payloads is that if the target, for example, you lose access or you end your engagement and you're not able to actually contact the particular user and have them uninstall the payload, well, they're going to keep connecting back indefinitely. So one thing we've done as part of the implementation of this is baked in an expiration date into every single payload we drop, into every single reverse HTTPS connection. So if you look at the advanced options for the reverse HTTPS stager, for example, you see there's actually a hard-coded expiration date baked into the binary when you send it out to the user. That ensures that if you ever, if the user is still running this thing 24 hours later, it automatically kills it. The same goes on the agent side. If you can set a maximum hour count for how long the agent should run, and if for some reason they go beyond that, it can automatically uninstall itself, leave itself, and done. The second thing on here is exploit speed up. We really try to focus on safety, on accuracy, on running exploits in the exact order from top to bottom, so we have the least chance of crashing a system. The trouble with that is it's very CPU intensive to go through and analyze 10,000 machines, or 1,000 machines for that matter. When every machine has 15 vulnerabilities, every vulnerability has 15 references. The possibilities and the number of references you're looking at overall becomes very huge very quick. So as part of this, we went through and re-architected the entire exploit engine in Metasploit Pro. So that instead of going through and doing this very slow correlation, top to bottom, it goes through and does one giant cross-reference at once, and then sorts the data and goes through and does it much, much faster. So you can go from basically looking at 1,000 machines that you've just scanned to actually launching exploits on them in about 3 minutes, whereas before it could have taken 20, 30 minutes at this point. So one thing that a lot of users have asked about was, after I finished doing my pen test, how do I verify I've actually done it properly? How did I verify I fixed everything that I was working on? in those cases, we had the ability to generate replay scripts from within Metasploit Pro before, which is great for connecting it to Metasploit Framework and running them through there. But inside the product itself wasn't really a good way to just go replay. We solved that in this release. In the sessions page, you can now just click on replay and it replays all of your previous tests. This is great because let's say you go on site, you do a large-scale pen test, you own 30, 40 machines, you use passwords, you do all sorts of things to get around the network. You can then export out your Metasploit Pro zip file export within the product, hand it to your customer. They can use a trial version of Pro to import the zip file, and then click replay and replay all the same things that you did during your pen test. The great thing about that is they do mitigations and they want to verify those actually work properly. They don't have to call you and basically do a retest. You can let them verify their own results. So we thought that was a useful feature and something that a lot of users have been asking about. On the brute force side, I talked about it a little bit before, but we already support, we think password testing is really kind of the elephant in the room in a lot of pen tests, that it's how a lot of people often get in, but it's not something that's often considered, advanced or something people should really focus a lot of time on. We're glad that there's, people are starting to think more about this stuff. The new contest at DEF CON, Crack Me If You Can, does a really good job of kind of putting focus on passwords and password encryption. But it's kind of the overlooked area of security testing and pen testing. It's something that we really focus on a lot in Metasploit Pro because it's the way you get in half the time. Like, why would you need an exploit when you just log in the machine and run your code? This is the kind of thing we're going after, and we want to make this easy as possible in Pro. When you're doing password testing inside Pro, if you tell it to generate its own passwords, it'll actually generate passwords seeded from all the various network data you've already pulled. Things like your host names, your usernames, all kinds of data you run into in the system. That's all just kind of what it does by default. We now have the ability to actually tune exactly which of those are actually incorporated. So you can say, I don't want to use host names, I do want to use usernames, and you can really, manually tune all those individual bits. And of course, anytime you dump a password or you are able to guess a password, you can easily replay that guessed password across the entire network. So as soon as you have one win someplace, you can turn that into a network-wide win. All the various new limiters that are available in the brute force component allow you to actually choose the number of attempts per user, per service, and so on. So if you're trying to avoid a lockout policy or trying to avoid a denial of service on a system that is really slow or has other types of performance issues, that's very easy to do that now. The mutation engine actually allows you to do everything from like leet speak to other ways of doing, pen, pre-pen, things like that. And anytime you do a password dump on a system to the collection functionality, basically just your default dump your passwords, collect all your data kind of bit built in Metasploit Pro, it'll automatically seed a word list based on all of your known passwords, all of your existing rules, and then try to crack that automatically. So it's kind of a really fast single mode crack, but it does a huge wordless expansion. On the exploit side, I think we already touched this. Maybe one slide off here. Sorry, here we go. So depending on what you do, these may be that exciting, but we spent a lot of time just updating the reports in Metasploit Pro to really cover a lot of things we did before. It's a case where people want to see charts and graphs, even if they don't necessarily see much value in them, they want to see the charts and graphs there. Then for us, it was always kind of a fine line between adding gratuitous charts and actually having charts that mean something. So when we go into the demo section, we'll try to talk about what things we've actually done on that front that we think actually represent real value, real data, kind of give you a different view of the network than you'd see otherwise. And again, if you're trying to, we're going to officially launch this August 1st, so that usually means, July 31st, just before midnight, everything gets pushed out. If you're an existing customer of Metasploit Pro or Express, you can just update and, it'll work transparently. If you want to become a customer, if you want to actually look at the trials, you can grab the trial today, but it's a 7-day trial by default, so you probably want to wait a couple days just to make sure you can get time to play a 4.0. And on the framework side, we're going to do a whole other set of stuff around Metasploit Framework 4 and all the stuff that's happening on the open source side. So all kinds of really fun things we're working on there. So keep an eye on the blog there and just keep running MSF Update and SPN up in the short term. So with that, let me skip back over to the actual demo and hopefully stop berating you with slideware. All right, let's give that a second to sync. So when you first log into Metasploit Pro, one thing you'll notice is this little dashboard. It's been here for a while. There's nothing really too different about that. You will notice all the new UI themes, all the new logos, all the new layout, a much more intuitive kind of action bar at the top that's consistent across everything. There's now a project-wide search bar as well, so if you want to go through and find all of your Windows machines in one shot, you can easily do that. You can also tell it to search all of your various all your various service banners. You want to say, I want to find anything running Apache. You just type Apache here, and this will show you any machines that run Apache, what port that Apache is running on. So it's a great kind of global level project search that's now available within the dashboard page. On the import front, I just want to touch on this real quick because we've added so many different formats to it. If you kind of highlight this, you'll see we've added everything from Encircle support for IP360, NetSparker, every Nessus format known to man. The Qualys Asset XML is not supported as of this release, along with things like AppScan. Something a lot of folks don't realize is you can just import your own Nmap XML directly into Metasploit Pro, and it just uses it. It's great. It doesn't need to go through and rescan everything if you already have your data. On the same token, if you're capturing traffic off a Wi-Fi network or you're capturing traffic off some other network and you want to do kind of a passive seed for your pen test, you can just upload a PCAP directly into Pro and it just loads it up. So it's a great way to kind of save some time and automatically identify various services and machines, things like that. When you do a PCAP import, it'll actually identify services based on banners and actually try to identify open ports based on the traffic. So it's not it's not too comprehensive in that sense right now, but it's a great way to kind of seed your tests based on active hosts if you don't want to actually start doing the full scan. So you can tell the UI here is actually quite different and hopefully a little bit cleaner, a lot easier to use, definitely prettier as far as our developers are concerned. We've got all sorts of new functionality available here. One thing that was available before, but a lot of folks weren't really quite sure how to use, was tagging. Tagging's the ability to go through and add an arbitrary tag to a number of systems, and that tagging can then be used for both reporting, it can be used for targeting, it can be used for organization, splitting the host across multiple pen testers. What we see a lot of enterprise customers doing is taking the host list here, splitting it out by, let's say, Windows machines, choosing all the Windows machines, tagging all those as, okay, well, Bob's really good at hacking Windows boxes. Let's basically give it to Bob to work on. So we've tagged the machines as Bob's machines, and let me get that right. I think I hit the wrong button. So now these machines are tagged as Bob. So if I go back to the main host list again, I can see, okay, here's the machines that I'm currently working on. Here's the ones that I've given Bob to work on. So use my search query. Here we go. So I can see Bob's working on these 4 machines. If I want to work on a couple of different machines, I can do it this way. So it's a great way to take, let's say, a list of 2,000 machines, 3,000 machines, and start splitting it up across a large number of individual pen testers. So if you're collaborating as a team, this is a great way to do that. Because it is a web-based product, because it is a multi-user product, it's very easy to take an entire team, have them all work on the same pen test at the same time, and it's just something you just don't really find in many other tools available today. Now, the cool thing about the tagging stuff, and I'm going to kind of go off on a tangent here for a second, is tagging allows you to actually do all sorts of fun things. You can actually make it, add a description to it saying, these machines have a backdoor installed, or what it happens to be. So you can add whatever note you want here. You can then flag it either as an internal note, which is what it is by default, so only people that are on your pen test can see that note, or you can edit it again and then flag it so it actually shows up in the reports by saying this should show up in the report summary for all these machines, it should show up in the report detail, and yes, this is a critical finding because these machines are backdoored. And now when you go into the reporting section, anytime you have to generate a report, you'll see these tags actually showing up in the report if they've been flagged as such. So it's not just a way to do organization of hosts on these large-scale pen tests, it's also a great way to actually add your findings as you go, if you will. So on that note, one thing that we also worked on was actually adding the ability to manually add vulnerabilities to systems. So when you're importing data from multiple vulnerability scanners, at least one of them is generally going to have a false positive. We now have the ability to delete vulnerabilities that are imported, modify vulnerabilities that are imported, change the references, or even just add new vulnerabilities as well. So if you want to add a particular CVID or a particular vulnerability to a particular system, it's really easy to go ahead and do that now. One thing that a lot of folks asked for was the ability to rerun a task after they've done it before. So let's say you're scanning a network, and that network requires some very precise tuning to go through and you test the network reliably, whether it's by setting your retry counts or some specific Nmap option you have to specify for your scan to be reliable for that. For example, on Wi-Fi networks, you have lots of packet loss, things like that. You can go to the advanced options, tune all these various parameters, and say I want to always exclude port 22 because this particular device falls over when I scan it. I also want to include port 4444 because my backdoors are always running that port. I want to see if I find them. I want to disable this, enable this, and so on. You can set up all your settings here, tell it to launch a scan, and it's going to kick off the scan like it would otherwise. And I'm actually just going to stop the scan because I've already run the scan on this particular network. But if I go back to the task list now, you can see there's actually a replay button available. And the replay button applies to the majority of the tasks that are available. If you go through and look at the advanced options, all those settings are now preserved for us. So if you've got a particular task you're trying to accomplish in your pen test, you don't want to type the same command line out 50 times, you can actually just go through and replay the last time you ran it successfully. So this is kind of the beginning of profiles and templates, things like that we're going to do going forward, but it's a good first step in that sense. So moving forward, we've talked about just about everything at a high level so far. On the import side, just because it just added the demo, it's kind of fun to do it. If you click on browse, we go to our desktop, we find our data folder, wherever I put it. Here we go. So this is a core impact project report. So if I'm trying to migrate data from a core impact project into Metasploit Pro, I can just import that directly. You go to our host list, you can now see that the data has actually been imported. So it's not too complete yet, mostly because some of the one of the things we found out when adding importers for all these various services is a lot of these data formats are missing critical data. You actually need to exploit it. So for example, I can't tell you the number of vendors that don't correlate what vulnerabilities they find with what port the vulnerability is exploited on. So for example, Redden is a great example of this. They produce an XML output format that doesn't tell you what particular port a vulnerability was found on. So if you scan a system with 3 different web servers on it, or 10 different vHosts on 3 different web servers, it'll say this particular web server has this vulnerability, but not indicate which actual port it was on, which drives me crazy. So you can't correlate that easily. We do a bunch of stuff on the Metasploit side now to automatically guess the ports, things like that, but we're basically limited by the available data in a lot of these vendor exports. So for the love of God, if you're building a product and generating XML data, always correlate your services with your vulnerabilities because it drives us crazy trying to correlate it otherwise. So in this case, I think this particular host, same thing with Core Impact, for example, they provide vulnerability references which don't really make much sense because the vulnerabilities aren't tied to a service. In this case, they won't even be exploited. But you kind of have to guess what particular service, particular vulnerabilities are reported on. Anyways, I'll stop whining about other vendors' data at this point, but we've added, I think, close to 30 different import formats now. And one thing we find is that people consistently get that wrong in terms of correlating services to services to vulnerabilities. So we've played around with most of the settings before. I don't want to dive too much into the existing features because I know a lot of folks have already seen this stuff. One thing I do want to show off real quick is the new global settings section. This really exposes a lot of the new functionality that we had available. So before I talked about the HTTPS, HTTP payloads where they connect back through the existing user's credentials and do full HTTPS and HTTP connectbacks. You can now enable those globally directly through the settings page here. So if you wanted to always use HTTPS, you can then click it here, same for HTTP. So if you only pick HTTP, it'll prefer HTTP. If you pick both, it'll prefer HTTPS, but then fall down to HTTP. So it's a great way to go through and automatically choose exactly what type of payload settings you want at a global level within the system. On the API side, you can actually issue API keys directly from the product interface. So if you want to use RPC clients or any of the command line tools we've provided as part of the SDK or as part of the Ruby gem, you can then generate an API key and manage those keys directly from the API here as well. On the macro side, we've talked about this a little bit. I've gone ahead and created 2 macros just to kind of demonstrate what they do. The first one will install a persistent agent automatically whenever something connects in. And you can see we've got 1 macro running. It's the first action in order is run this particular agent. If you click on little settings here, you can see all the various configuration options available for this macro. And once you save it and add it, it shows up. Now if I go back into the macros page and click on the steal passwords one, this one is a good example of how you can take lots of post modules that affect lots of different platforms and then run them all on one particular session. So this particular one will run the password dumping routines for Linux, OS X, Solaris, Windows, and dumping the Windows Outlook password and chain them all together in one big macro action. And every one of these you can configure individually if you like as part of this process. So no matter what type of session you compromise, if you set this macro to automatically run, it will automatically dump the passwords as part of the process. Same thing goes for the agent code, same thing goes for anything else. Another example is, let's say you want to automatically remove all the agents you've installed, whatever things connect back in. You can create a new macro called, uninstall agents. So we go ahead and add the macro name, save it, give it a maximum runtime for it to execute. And then in the list down here, you can just basically do a search for agent, find the agent cleaner module, and this will basically automatically remove any agent that happens to be installed in the system when it connects in. And we're done. So at this point, we've got a macro that installs agents, a macro that uninstalls agents, and then the macro that steals all the passwords. So if you go into any one of our projects now, whether it's running a brute force attack where you can get sessions through PSExec, things like that, or a full-blown exploit, there's now a little drop-down page where it allows you to choose exactly what macros you want to run. So in this case, we can say we want it to install the agent, steal passwords, uninstall agents, and so on. So anyways, make it very easy to go through, automatically do various actions when you launch exploits and things like that. One thing you'll notice is that as part of the UI overhaul, we've basically hidden a lot of the advanced options by default, just because some folks are getting overwhelmed by having 10,000 little checkboxes and checkboxes to twiddle. So we've kind of simplified things a bit. So you generally just type in the target names, and you're good to go. One thing a lot of folks don't realize is that the target names can actually take tags as well. So you put in pound and then Bob, for example. This will go through and automatically exploit all the machines that have the tag Bob applied to it. And this hash syntax works all the way across the product. So you want to generate a report just based on tag. You want to generate an export data file, an activity log, whatever it happens to be. It's very easy to use the hashtags to include and exclude IPs based on that tagging. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and set the auto launch macro to steal passwords and go ahead and kick this exploit and run off for the entire network. So this is a pretty small network. There's really not much on it right now. I've got a couple of target machines, mostly some Windows boxes, a couple of Linux boxes here and there. I'm just going to nuke these two guys because part of a different test. So while the exploit process runs, and hopefully it's kicked off over here. Oh, sorry, it's didn't actually launch it. Let's try that again. So I go too fast and hit the wrong button. So we'll pick our steal passwords module and exploit. Great. So now our exploit task is running. It's doing a huge correlation across all the open services, all the open vulnerabilities, cross-referencing that across every module we have in the back end, and then running all those modules in the order of oldest and most reliable to newest and least reliable up to the settings that we specified. So you can really dial in exactly how much risk you're willing to accept in your automated pen test. So you can see we've already compromised one machine. This is I want to say this is a 2003 server. I'm not sure. It's looking for dev stuff. Let's go back and look at the exploit list. Looks like we've got 3 sessions so far. And let's try browser the first one here. Hopefully it won't blow up on us. Yep. All right. Let's see if the developers who are watching the webcast can fix it before I'm done with the test. So anyways, that's currently going. At this point, you can do things like do data collection across all those sessions. And this will do things like automatically dump all the password hashes, and when it has the password hashes, automatically crack those passwords to John the Ripper in the background. So a quick demonstration of that. Cool, this is going, so it's dumping the password hashes, and we'll let this run for a little bit while we keep going. I'm trying to think of what else we can demo in this right now. I think on the brute force side probably is the biggest set of new options that are available. If you click on the brute force option, you'll see that it automatically identifies every service that's currently exposed to the network. So anytime that you've got a DB2 server running, it'll automatically check the checkbox for DB2 as part of this, and otherwise automatically identify all the services, even if they're running in a port that's not the standard port. So it finds a secure shell port on a high net port number, it'll then automatically check the SSH brute force option here and provide that as an option. On the depth side, you can see that we've got a whole lot of options available for the type of test to run. We can also do a really quick one, a defaults one, a normal one. Normal is where it starts combining all the project seed data into password options. So anytime host name, username, etc., gets basically rolled into the word list automatically up to whatever the predefined limit was. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that we've got the brute force limiters. These are all the new limiters available for brute force, telling it the maximum timeout per servers, maximum number of attempts per user, and so on. So lots of great options here. And of course, you can go through and pick arbitrary macros to run whenever you get a session this way as well. And you can also overload listener ports, listener hosts, the interpreter versus shell, all this fun stuff here. And if in the global settings you flag to use the HTTP and HTTPS payloads, those would automatically use HTTPS as well as part of the connection. So everything's pretty much transparent from the top down at this point. You can also see how it generates all the various credentials. You can tell it to exclude names as passwords, to skip common Unix accounts, skip common Windows service accounts, all these various mutators that are available for different password types. So this has gone pretty well so far. We've got 6 sessions open in the background across a pretty wide set of machines. So click on those real quick to see what we've actually managed to compromise. So at this point, we've compromised one Linux server 2 different ways. We've compromised 2 different Windows boxes over here, and we've got looks like another Linux box over here as well. So let's see if this is going to blow up on me again. And go. That's what I get for using a development copy for my demos, but this was literally checked out SVN about 10 minutes ago. And it looks like it's working well, so just have to give it a second here. So one thing you'll notice about the screenshot is this is actually a Korean version of Windows XP, and it doesn't have any trouble at all compromising it, getting access to it, screenshots, stuffing passwords, all that just works the way you expect it to. Some multi-way passwords won't be automatically cracked, of course, but the great thing about using password hashes to authenticate and doing pass-the-hash attacks is that you don't have to know the native language to be able to pass the hashes between different machines. So if you dump the language hashes off of one Korean language or other non-US language machine, you can still pass those hashes to any other machine. It works the way you expect it would. You don't have to actually know what it says or know what the password means to do that. On the post-exploitate module side, you'll see we've got a huge new set of post-exploit modules available with this release. Everything from running multiple shells to dumping passwords from a billion different services. We've made it very easy to basically grab as much data as you can from any services and go from there. Everything from stealing your iOS backup files, including your location database, grabbing your Bitcoin wallet if that's actually something that you have, and all the stuff related to Metasploit Pro in terms of running macros and agents and so on. For folks who aren't familiar with Metasploit Pro, one thing you may want to play with is the VPN pivot. I think this particular machine is a single home, so it won't really help much, but essentially it's an Ethernet tap over SSL you can use to basically plug a system directly into the remote network. The great thing about this is it's not just getting access to the remote network, it's that the remote network can now reach your machine as well. So a lot of folks don't realize that VPN pivot really is a bidirectional connection. So the cool thing about this, and what I think someone's going to talk about at B-Sides coming up, is actually putting machines into the remote network through the VPN pivot functionality. So one way you can do that is you go into the campaigns dialog, and you say, okay, I want to start a new campaign. I want it to be like a web drive-by attack. We're going to be browsing the website, basically gets exploits thrown at them left and right until we get a shell. We can call this drive-by. We can tell it to listen on the 00 address, which is important if you want to use it through the pivot. We can tell it to automatically install a persistent agent automatically when anybody connects into it. Tell it to run a web server. Yeah, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine, and everything else should be good. This will take us to the web page macro editor. We're actually still rolling in the cloning system and the templates, but those will be available soon. Actually, hey, look, it already works. Go, Matt. So if we want to click on something like iTunes.com, I have no idea if this works because I just updated SVN a few minutes ago, but you can theoretically go out and take any arbitrary URL, clone the website, suck it into the product, and then use that to launch your social engineering attack. And my fingers are crossed. I think Matt's are too at this point, so we'll see what happens. And it's taking too long and I'm impatient, so I'm going to skip over to something else real quick. But the idea is that after you start running your social engineering attack, you can actually start the web server up and then use your internal IP address through the VPN pivot functionality and then send people a link to an internal server as opposed to an external server. So it's one thing to be clicking an untrusted link sitting on the web, some scary URL, but it's something else entirely to click on a server name that's actually internal to your network. So the cool thing about this is you can now start doing phishing campaigns and drive-by attacks inside of a particular company network. So when people click on those malicious links, they're actually clicking on an internal machine, which bypasses the corporate firewall, bypasses the corporate web proxies. It may bypass security settings, the local zone. There's a lot of great things about doing an attack on the internal network after you've compromised one machine and using that to compromise the rest.
Hey, HD.
So yes, sir.
While you're on this topic, real quick, somebody asked a quick question regarding this specifically. They wanted to know if VPN pivot is only useful on dual home hosts, or did they misunderstand the comment you just made?
If you're connected to the same Ethernet segment as your target, yay, it's all blowing up. So if you're connected to the same Ethernet segment as your target, VPN pivot's not going to get you any access you don't already have because you're basically connected to the same physical Ethernet network. If the machine is a single interface target, and it's running on a different network than your own, then a single interface NIC is just fine for pivoting. It doesn't care about that. So unless you compromise an internal server and that internal server has only one NIC, that would still just work fine. It wouldn't cause you any problems. It's only if you're directly connected, like I am in my demo environment, that you can't directly pivot over to your existing NIC because it would be bridging you to your own network interface, basically. So there's no real technical problem with doing that. It's mostly an issue of whether you want your your local host routes to be confused about which interface to use to talk, because if they start routing traffic through the pivot interface for local machines, then your existing payload connection to the same machine will then drop because you're trying to talk to it over its own pivot. So it's more of a routing issue than anything else. So I think I blew things up off this dev copy, so let's see if this goes. It's still unhappy, so let me kick this off real quick. Again, this is why it's this is why the release date's August 1st as opposed to today. We're still working out some of the bugs here. Anybody sees the Metasploit framework, one thing you may notice right now is it says 4.0 testing. A lot of people consider that release, but we're still fixing bugs, so we'll get there. So going back to the task log again, I want to should be able to demo this. Let's see. The campaign's been a little broken. Where's my collection task? If you look at the very bottom of the collection task, one thing you'll notice now is these are all the passwords that were automatically cracked by John the Ripper. So all the stuff that shows in yellow down here at the bottom. So, for example, picking out user, username, user, password, user with uppercase U is very trivial for it to figure out. Same thing goes for administrator, but it'll also try things like administrator with lead speak characters. It'll try things like administrator, bang, putting dates in front and back of it. We use some of the rules from CoreLogic's Crack If You Can contest last year, as well as some of our own rules, and that's actually part of the open source tree as well.
Is there CUDA support for this?
Sorry, Don, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry about that. We have a lot of people asking, is there CUDA support for the built-in John features?
You're dropping out a bit, but I think I heard the question was, is there CUDA support in offline cracking? There isn't today. The way we'll probably end up doing that is because you don't always want your pen test machine being the machine that's chock full of GPU cards, because no one wants to run around from site to site with a big box full of GPU cards. We'll probably build kind of a generic service level API and a plugin system for it. So you can either build out your own GPU cloud and then use that to crack it, or you can actually use one of a bunch of commercial services that are shown up here for this. So right now we're talking to a couple commercial providers about what kind of API they're looking for, what kind of structure. To be honest, right now the biggest challenge there is nobody wants to send their passwords into the cloud to crack. Just people a little bit paranoid about that so far, so I can't really blame them. So far we've talked about some of the integration functionality, some of the UI improvements. We've gone through a lot of the functionality on the connectivity, agents, listeners, payloads, things like that, the macro editor. One thing, this really ties back into the integration side again, is being able to create arbitrary listeners that listen to various payload sections and using that to integrate with other toolkits. So a lot of folks use David Kennedy's social engineering toolkit or set to do their social engineering engagements. Even people use Metasploit Pro for one side of it, may use set for another part of it. As part of that, what you can actually do is go through and create a new listener inside Metasploit Pro, tell it exactly what type of payload to use, whether it's a Java interpreter, PHP, command shell, Windows, HTTPS, etc. So here we can create a new HTTPS listener on any arbitrary port. You can pick 443, you can pick 995, it doesn't really matter. And you can tell it to automatically run a macro and anything connects to it, like installing an agent. And finally, you tell it what project to dump the session into as part of where that session should show up, or where the reporting should take place. So once you save this listener, it automatically runs in the background, and if you go onto the Metasploit command line, you generate a new executable, or use one of these third-party tools that integrates with Metasploit. Any sessions you point back into Metasploit Pro on port 443 that happen to be reverse HTTPS will now show up in that project as if you compromised them as part of the project. So you can easily mix and match multiple copies of Metasploit. You can also override any one of those previous functions we looked at, like exploit or brute force. They all have an option to override listener host field. So for example, to go down to the payload section here, you can see there's a field for listener host, and this actually lets us override the address that the shells will go back to. So let's say we had a Colo server running on Google's DNS server. We can then basically point our shells to that server instead. All our sessions should show up there. So this comes down to kind of being open, having an open framework, being really flexible integration, make it very easy to kind of send your shells wherever they need to go, and use Metasploit Pro either as a shell collector or as a shell generator. So for large-scale pen tests, this really matters, especially when users are kind of popping up and down. One of the cool things about the new payloads, all the reverse HTTPS payloads, for example, is that they'll do a DNS resolution of the URL to connect. So let's say that the DNS name changes. Like let's say you set up a DNS record that points to your listener, and you're moving your listener from IP to IP and then updating your DNS records. That would work fine. The payloads will actually follow you around from system to system if you do that. So that's one really good use case of the arbitrary listeners, and be able to actually move your sessions between different installations. So at this point, we've got enough data here that we can actually do some fun things on the reporting side. So if you click on the report button, you can see we've got all our standard live reports available. These are all flashy and full of charts and whatnot these days. You can also click on the generate audit report. It's going to be more of a formal reports that you typically see in like an auditing or consulting setting. We're going to go kick off a report. Let this run in the background. While it's running, we'll talk about one last thing here, which we didn't get to before, which is the Nexpose integration of the product. If you go to the very bottom of the global settings page, you'll see a list of Nexpose consoles. And these are a list of systems that basically are running a copy of Nexpose. You configure the username, the password, the ports, all that fun stuff about it. And after you've registered the console inside Metasploit Pro, you can then use the drop-down list within any one of the projects to run new scans, to do imports, things like that. So it really simplifies the integration process. If you go to the import page, you'll notice that in addition to the file to upload, we have a Nexpose site to upload drop-down. This will automatically go out there and list all the various sites available on your Nexpose consoles and provide a list of console name - site name to pull data from. So if we have a large Nexpose installation and we want to pull data from our LA site, you can easily do that this way. You'll actually go out, connect to your Nexpose installation, tell us to generate a new ad hoc report, suck that report down, delete the temporary copy of the report, and it works the way you expect it to. So it's much easier to have to go through and do an export from one product and import to another product and so on. So this is just kind of the beginning of where we are with Nexpose. Going forward, we do much tighter integration. So for example, we have the ability to, anytime you do a automated pen test on a particular network after doing a Nexpose import, you can then tell it to go connect back out to the Nexpose console and then add exemptions for the vulnerabilities that weren't exploitable. So that's kind of the direction we're headed. Right now we've got this direct integration through the import functionality, through the APIs, but long term we're really looking at a full bidirectional data feed between both your VA products and your pentest products, and by that point a lot more SIM products as well. So we're really trying to be as open as we can about the data and making sure that anything you're doing on the pentest side is very easy to integrate with the rest of your business processes, reporting, security management, things like that. So I think at this point all of our framework users are probably sick of seeing this big flashy product and actually want to see what the cool stuff looks like on the command line. So let me skip back over to my VMware workstation real quick. Actually, looks like the report's done. Let's look at the report first, then we'll drop on the command line and play some of the low-level stuff. And switch screens real quick. So you should now be able to see the generator report. It's got lots of fun little graphs in it. One graph we actually like a lot is this guy, which is showing the relative attack surface by OS. It'll actually map your number of discovered services based on your vulnerabilities, based on how you actually exploited it, and take into account all sorts of other fun things to figure out which particular OS is actually your biggest risk of the network. Surprisingly, this network actually has more Linux vulnerabilities than anything else. And here you can see the critically tagged tag we had before, the Bob tag. You can see a list of other machines. You can see breakdowns of compromises by frequency, password hashes are pulled down, all kinds of fun stuff. So when you have really large data sets, like 1,000 systems, 500 systems, this gets a lot more useful. We can see breakdowns based on different OSs, based on the most compromised username, all kinds of fun stats here that are useful for getting a handle on what particular vulnerabilities you have and where the biggest risks are. So with that, let me skip back over to my console. So I'm kind of a Ruby purist in the sense that my idea of an API is a Ruby prompt I can type command lines or commands on. So this is after installing the MSF RPC-client gem, which is to do gem install this, we'll actually install that gem. So once you've done that, you can easily run the command above here, which is going to the examples directly of the gem, telling it to connect to this particular host and this port with this SSL token, and an authentication token that provisioned through the API. This will drop us a Ruby prompt. At this point, we can just do rpc.call, core.version. This will then dump the core version number of Metasploit API. So there's all kinds of cool things that are available in the basic API. And let me skip back over to the API doc real quick. So you can see a draft copy of the API guide. This thing is ridiculously long. There's tons and tons and tons of API calls you can call on Metasploit. A lot of these are available in the free version through the RPC interface there. A lot of them are available through the Pro side, especially all the automation features we saw. Our dirty secret of Metasploit Pro is that every single thing you saw in the UI is actually driven through an RPC channel on the back end. The UI doesn't actually do anything. All it does is call the RPC backend that does the rest of it. So when we talk about the Pro API built with the RPC channel, every little bit of Pro functionality from automated exploitation, the fancy reporting, everything in between is basically implemented in the RPC API and documented in this document. So this gives you an example of kind of how to go through and call all the various bits. This will be released next Monday once we finish all the various cleanup work on it. But the idea is that you can easily list tasks, list threads, set variables, run modules, run sessions, automate backdoors. If you want to schedule like a network-wide pen test to run via cron job, you can add a little script that calls this gem and kicks off a new scan every night at midnight, waits for the scan to complete, then does a full-blown pen test on it, generates the report from the pen test, mails you the pen test, deletes the project. So it's really easy to go through and automate anything you saw today in the back end through this RPC API. This thing covers everything from doing product updates to licensing activations. When you get down to actually some of the really fun ones here, like let me call it task list, give you an idea of what that looks like. And where's VMware? So if we call the task list function inside the RPC interface, you'll see it actually gives us a nice big list as a Ruby hash format of all the tasks that are currently running in all the various projects. So you can consider this kind of your PS for Metasploit Pro in terms of what's running. So I know a lot of folks probably aren't too interested in kind of the fiddly bits here in the command line. But the neat thing about this is they all use the same syntax, the same command. If you use our API for it, you can basically easily create your own little wrapper tools that all take the same syntax, same parameters. So for this particular site, you can see we've got this particular toolkit will actually generate reports from a remote copy of Metasploit Pro. So we can tell it to go through and generate a XML report, and we're going to do that from the Metasploit Pro Metasploit 4.0 demo project. And we'll see that's an output file called test.xml. This will go through and kick off a new report task in the back end of Pro. Once that report task is finished, it'll download that automatically. I think this might be wacky. Let me try it again. No, I'm getting the task wrong. Oh well. Anyhow, so the idea is you've got this huge document of API calls you can then call to easily go through and launch almost any type of functionality you want that we support. It looks like we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and break down for questions. I know they've been stacking up in the background. Let me switch back over to the Metasploit Pro UI again. I know I've been mostly focusing on the Pro API so far. If you have any questions about what we're doing on the framework side, there's lots of cool things happening. The POSIX interpreter is actually nearly done. We've got a huge effort on the user guide side right now to clean up all the user documentation. We've got a ton of stuff happening right now on the logo side of all things. We've got some pretty funny banners that are showing up. So while Don gets questions going, let me swap back over to the console and show you some of the fun banners that have been added recently. Oh, if anyone has an ASCII art wizard and want to submit their own banners, we've got a couple of days left that we're actually taking submissions. So you can see we've got some silly matrix ones. We've got some ASCII art that David did. We've got I Love Shells from Egypt. We've got the cow, of course, because we tried to remove the cow and Rob Floyd threw a fit, so we had to throw the cow back in. He loves some cow, so the cow's back. We've got bigger cows. We've got smaller cows. We've got bigger cows again. All sorts of fun stuff. And buried here somewhere, you'll see some of the other graphics work that was done. Like we've got the missile command version. We've got the 3Com Super Act 2 login. So anyways, if you have any fun ideas for new banners you'd like to see in the Metasploit startup, feel free to submit them to us, and we'll definitely take those still. Don, are we good for questions? Or
we are good. We have a whole we have a whole bunch coming in, so I have a bunch of them compiled already. More are still coming in. We'll try to get to as many as possible. But as you were mentioning that you covered a lot of things today, but there's clearly not enough in a simple hour just to go over everything. But I had a lot of questions on what are some of the new features dealing with web app pen testing in Metasploit 4?
So the web app side, there's still a large set of modules in the back end you can run kind of ad hoc. So the way we've kind of broken up the web testing is you've got modules that are, you've got vulnerabilities that are on known applications, things like your PHP-MyAdmin, things like, your ASP.NET bugs that are kind of standard for that particular implementation. Those types of exploits live in our standard exploit database. We don't really spend a lot of time calling them out as something separate. We just consider them just another exploit. Then you've got your custom applications, which are ones that you can either use Metasploit Pro to go through and do a web spidering on and do the audit and then do exploitation, or you can use your other, whether it's Sport Pro, whether it's some other tool you use to bring your data into Metasploit and do exploitation from here. On that front, we haven't done too much in terms of expanding the coverage. You can still import data from a wide variety of formats. So the biggest thing about this release is being able to import data from Burp, import data from AppScan, import data from Akinetics. So there's a bunch of formats here that are now exposed that we didn't have support for on the import side. As far as actual coverage of what we test, there hasn't been too many changes. The web scan's gotten a few improvements in terms of how to speed it up and do better VOS checking. The audit engine's actually found a few more things that other products haven't so far. It's a funny thing about web app testing. I mean, if you look at the possible permutations available for, a form with 4 different fields, then it gets pretty ridiculous in terms of the number of inputs you can pass into it and the number of options available for it. One thing that we're noticing is that no matter who writes a web scanner, it finds one more bug than everybody else. So we had a test the other day on our professional services side where they went through and they ran Burp, they ran this, they ran that, and every product found 1 or 2 little bugs, and they ran the Metasploit Pro web scanner and it found a command execution phone that they wouldn't have found otherwise. So it's useful to run lots of tools, even if Metasploit Pro won't be your end-all be-all for web app scanning. It'll generally find things that other products won't find just because it's written a little bit differently and it tries slightly different techniques. On the exploit side, we're still really focused on RFI, LFI, command execution, things like that. So we don't have full-blown SQL injection there yet, but that's kind of the direction that we're going. We haven't seen too much demand on the website, mostly because our user base is really already kind of tied to the tools they use for that side, and they use Metasploit Pro for their large-scale engagement testing.
Okay, thanks. We have a whole bunch of different questions ranging from some technical, some not. So I'll try and go over a few where we had a number of people asking similar questions. Can you go over a little bit more about how Nexpo's integration is different from what Metasploit had before?
Yep, and the previous versions of Metasploit, we had the ability to basically import XML from Expos or use an Expos instance to go run a new scan. But what we found out is most of their users didn't want to do it that way. They didn't want to go through and run a new scan every time they wanted to bring data in from Expos. What they want to do is import the data they already had in the large enterprise data center. So the ability to import directly from a site without having to go through and basically export it from the site, bring it back in, that was huge. The early version of this integration actually appeared on the framework first through an update to the Nexpos plugin about a month ago. So if you've been using the Nexpos plugin on the command line, then there probably won't be too much difference as far as you're concerned. But as far as how we do things in Pro and the direct integration, list of site names, things like that, this is all pretty new. And this was basically just to adjust the product for how our users wanted to use it. Where they didn't want to go through and run new scans all the time, they wanted to import their existing data more than they wanted to run new scans.
All right, here's a simple question. What's up with the Metasploit T-shirts, and what's J-Cran's deal?
I'm debating whether I need to call the people out by name that have prevented this from happening so far, but there are 2 people on the marketing team who have been very busy trying to get that done. We're going to see if we can get something out before blackout or not. They realize that the people are standing outside the door with pitchforks and torches right now, so hopefully they'll realize there's some pressure to get this done.
Okay, going back onto some more serious stuff, we have a lot of questions on the integration of password cracking. So with that, does the password cracking support specifying password complexity requirements such as, hey, it's a Windows password, we want 8+ characters with at least 1 uppercase, lowercase, special character, etc.?
It doesn't yet. It's actually, if you want to see the code for this, the password cracking module that we call in Pro is actually the same open source module we committed to the open source tree. So if you want to go into the open source tree, it's modules auxiliary analyze JTR fast crack, I think that's what it's called. And it's basically building out all the functionality we need to build those types of bits, build those types of rule sets in the future. But this is primarily focused on taking passwords that are already pretty weak to start with, turning them into clear text passwords, so you can do a relay attack between a NTLM system that you cracked, something like a Windows machine with a line hash, and then being able to replay that to secure shell on a Linux box. So for us, it was less about actually building this fully functional offline cracking system that can handle the full range of options, and more about how do we take passwords that we know are weak, that we know are in layman and SLM format, and then apply those passwords to other systems without having to go through and crack them externally first. So this is kind of our first foray into it. Part of the work actually built all the structures in place to do that type of testing going forward. We've got a couple community members already working on doing integration from the OS X side, from the Linux side, and so on, but it's not really a full-blown offline cracker yet. So you can probably expect to see that in the future, but this is kind of our first foray into that area.
There are a number of questions dealing with that as well on integrating rainbow tables, and I would assume, again, not yet, but you're looking into it based on your last answer.
Yep, same thing. The challenge with rainbow tables is, the amount of storage they take, and if you're using like any of the GPU-based rainbow tables, you need actual special hardware for it. And most of the laptops people carry around these days just aren't that great at it. So those are looking more and more like there's going to be some kind of external plugin or some new settings page where you can, use various connectors to either connect that to your own systems or to connect that to some kind of cloud provider like Amazon to deploy your own cracking cluster. So that's kind of, we're looking at doing that, but it'll most likely be connecting to a different system or using some kind of common API to do that.
Okay. I don't know if you have anything to do with this, but there's some question on Dave Kennedy's book, and will there be any updates for the book based on the new version 4?
I believe the way they do their updates is there'll probably be like a volume 2 in about a year from now. So the stuff's going to continuously change in Metasploit. We're going to do what, now that we've got kind of this new 4.0 base platform down, we're not going to make too many major changes going forward. The only really small thing that was different between what was finalized in the book and what ended up coming out for the 4.0 release was some of the database commands changed in terms of the names. We basically just lopped off the DB prefix. But besides that, it's almost perfect as far as coverage of the book and the features and how things work. So they're going to continue updating the content. I'm assuming they're going to do volume 2 probably next year when they get around to it, or assuming we can ever convince them to write a book again because of how painful the process is. But I'm hoping they do. I think they did a great job, and hope they do it again.
Okay, cool. Someone asked that Nitro is the only SEIM that it integrates with. How about Tripwire Log Center or some others?
Hey, we'd love to integrate. It's a question of if they're interested, we've got an open data format, we've got an open API for even running attacks. So, we're not trying to tie ourselves to any one vendor in that sense. Just the Nitro guys were basically came up with the idea, approached us about it, have been working with us in the background for a long time. So they definitely get props for spending a lot of time and really getting this out under a pretty fast deadline, considering how new a lot of our APIs and XML formats are. So, we're happy to work with other vendors, but Nitro is the first one to really approach us. That's worked with us so far.
While you're on that topic, can you tell us where we can find the documentation on the APIs?
Most of the docs haven't been published yet, so we're probably going to do a huge push, I want to say like Sunday night, maybe even Saturday, depending where we are with the documentation. So all the XML docs will show up then. The RPC documents aren't public yet, but the short answer is the docs aren't out yet. The long answer is you'll probably see them trickle out over the next few days as our tech writers finish up and we make more progress.
Cool. All right, we have a few questions here on AV evasion, such as for campaigns, will there be a built-in option to specify payload encoding for AV evasion, as well as is the persistent agent just Meterpreter, and are there any special AV evasion techniques built in or available to modify in the agent?
Sure. So the agent stuff is actually fun because we're using a lesser-known feature of the Metasm backend, which actually lets us compile C code on the fly. So the agents that we install in Metasploit are using Meterpreter as the actual payload that connects back, but the agent wrapper itself, the thing that's actually running on the disk, it's actually the thing that the user actually sees that the AV is fighting against. That thing is actually dynamically compiled C. So the great thing about that is right now it's pretty static. We're still making a few more mods to it after we finish up our AV testing. But essentially every time you install a new agent, it's dynamically compiled from scratch. And because of that, we can do things like reorder the code, change the bytes around, basically throw all the signatures for a loop every single time you generate an agent that's doing dynamic compilation, basically. So that's how we're approaching the AV evasion side on the campaigns, the persistent agent piece. With Metasploit Pro, one thing a lot of folks don't realize is that when you generate a binary in the campaigns, and I should be able to show you this real quick. Let's see, download executable. This may be a little bit tricky to do with the current setup, but essentially, this is still busted, sorry. But essentially, we're shipping a pre-signed binary that's signed by a real certificate authority with Metasploit Pro product and only Metasploit Pro. And then we're injecting our real payload into the signature section of the binary on the fly. And so when you generate a new executable from the campaign side, by default for the actual end user executable they see, that thing's actually a valid signed, CA signed binary. On the agent side, we do dynamic compilation instead of doing the signature trick, just was for finding it that's actually working out pretty well so far. We still need to tweak the code a little bit. What we're hoping to do is once the code works well on the Pro side, we'll basically backport a lot of the exe generation code back into the regular framework and make that available there as well. But there's a whole lot of like API testing and tweaks that have to happen before we're there yet. We'll probably see more of that happen during the week of Black Hat, actually.
Okay, here's some general Metasploit 4.
Sure I covered all the options available, but
probably good enough for these purposes. A lot of general Metasploit 4 questions, like does Metasploit 4 support IPv6?
So funny enough, Metasploit Pro itself doesn't support v6 yet, but every single backend component in the underlying Metasploit framework does. So for us, it's basically just, we need to get off our butts and finish the database work. All of the backend code, all the socket libraries, all the exploits. The payload's a little bit trickier because you basically have to use bind payloads if you're doing a link local network exploit, you have to use bind payloads because you don't know the remote interface ID to be able to use remotes. But there's a bunch of little caveats for how you do exploitation that are a little bit different on the v6 side. But we're very well situated to be, to go full v6 anytime. We just have to, spend about 2 weeks or a month finishing up all the database work to make sure it doesn't break anything. We do database queries with long v6 addresses. But it's not there yet in Pro, but it's very easy to use right now in the framework.
For those that are already using Metasploit Pro, is there going to be an upgrade path, or do you have to reinstall from scratch?
Basically the way you do an upgrade is the same way you do any other update. You go to software updates, click check for updates. It'll say, okay, you've got a new update, install it, done. So it's all directly through the web interface. We have an offline installer and an offline update system as well. So if you're locked in a skiff someplace exploiting really cool things you can't tell us about, you can contact support. They'll give you a link to an offline file. You can basically sneak your net in and install that way as well. So we support basically existing customers should be able to transparently upgrade through the update menu, and either that's through the online update system or through sneaker netting the offline update files. Okay.
Is Metasploit 4 browser independent? We notice you're running it through Firefox.
It's we had to bump up our requirements a little bit this time because we added lots of new fancy Ajax stuff. So if you look at our system requirements, they used to be like IE7, IE8, Firefox 3. We've basically raised that to Firefox 4, Chrome 10, and IE9 now. So IE9 is kind of dicey because we know Windows XP can't upgrade to IE9, and we still have a lot of XP users. So we're trying to fail gracefully when things don't work the way they're supposed to. This is the first release where we've really done enough UI work that it's getting tough to support some of the older browsers. So we're still doing a lot of our functionality testing, trying to do kind of nice, graceful downgrades when things aren't available. But we do support Firefox 4, Chrome 10 Plus, and IE9 right now. And it probably works in Safari. I know if I bring in my iPad and browse to Metasploit Pro, I can do it all just fine from my iPad too. So if you tie that into your VPN interface and put a remote installation online, you can basically do your full pen test from your iPad, no matter where you are, and it just works the way you expect.
Okay, as of now, I still have a bunch of questions right here, and I have over 20 that I haven't gotten to yet. We have about 10 minutes left. Do you have about 10 more minutes to answer a few more questions before we drop off?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not in any rush, so keep the questions going.
Okay, great. While we were talking about browsers, someone asked, will the Metasploit framework ever be published with a web client again?
We've debated it so far. The problem is we don't have time to maintain it. I mean, if someone comes out of the community and says, I really want to maintain a web interface to the Metasploit framework, and they want to put the time in to, actually keep the thing, fix bugs and things like that, great. We'd love to see someone step up and do it. The reason why the MSF web interface died in the first place is because the person who was originally maintaining it dropped off the face of the earth. Actually, he ended up playing WoW for 2 years. That's what happened. But that's actually killed more developers than you think. So if we find someone in the community who's willing to basically take on that type of role, whether it's a web interface, whether it's another GUI type interface like Armitage or MSF GUI, great, we're happy to have them. We probably can't spend too much of our own time maintaining it just because our own team is so focused on all of our UI work is on the pro side and all of our backend work is on the framework side. But again, if someone wants to step up the community and take over that, great.
Okay, a couple more questions. Here's one on macros. What language are the macros written in?
So the macros are Ruby-based, basically. Right now, they're just really simple chains of existing post modules. We're working on conditionals. We're working on various other logic to put in there as well. But again, it'll probably end up being Ruby-based in the long term, just because that's what everything else is written in.
Someone wanted to know if you can connect Metasploit 4 to a Rapid7 hosted engine.
Sorry, I missed the very last word of that.
No problem. Someone wanted to know if you can connect Metasploit 4 to a Rapid7 hosted engine.
not quite. You can connect it to a Rap7 console that's connected to a Rap7 hosted engine. So, for example, if you set up your console to use an engine to scan a particular site, and then you tell it to scan that site from within Metasploit Pro, it'll basically proxy through the console to tell it to run the scan of that engine, but it won't actually run it directly on the engine itself. The reason for that is just the way the licensing model and the kind of back-end authentication model of Nexpose works. It's all very tied to, there's a long story behind it, but basically engines are tied to license keys, which are tied to consoles, and so the only way we can really schedule tasks is by going through the console.
There's some other questions on scheduling. Is scheduling available through the Pro Express interface as well, or just the API?
Right now it's just API. We're really looking at what type of scheduling makes sense to do in the interface going forward. Scheduling is basically the big hot feature that everyone's asking for this release so far. We've got a couple customers looking at the alpha builds. We're about to do our beta builds. And scheduling is kind of one thing that's jumping out as, hey, why isn't scheduling here? So that's basically a no-brainer for us to have next release.
Okay. What's the preferred OS for running Metasploit 4 Pro?
We all love, some kind of a 64-bit Linux. For us, Ubuntu 64, either 10.04, 8.04. I guess 8.04 just went end of life, but 10.04, 11.04, 11.10, they all pretty much work fine. It's not too picky about it. I think we officially support CentOS 6, RHEL 6, RHEL 5, CentOS 5, Debian. So for the most part, any kind of solid Linux distribution is great. If you're doing large-scale testing, you want to have 64-bit boxes because you can stuff more RAM into it. Windows works, but again, Windows performance will be lower than you'll get anything else. And we also have the issue of conflicts with other software applications running on Windows. So if you have your AV program and your firewall program and everything else, you're constantly battling. they keep trying to delete Metasploit, and we keep trying to delete them. So between the two of them, it's not much fun on Windows. So we generally recommend people run it in a 64-bit virtual machine on Windows or a native Linux virtual machine. And with new OVF files, with the new Amazon deployment options, it becomes much easier to do that.
Okay, we have a bunch of people that asked some questions because you mentioned about importing stuff from Core Impact. So somebody asked regarding migrating from Core Impact to Metasploit, are there any comparisons out there of tools which sales reps can use to convince their customers to switch from Core Impact to Metasploit?
There are. We've got a couple kind of, just side-by-side guides we do internally just for our own folks to look at. And what we're finding out is a lot of people on the core side, and again, I don't want to go too anti-vendor here, but the stuff we have in Metasploit Pro as far as their collaboration, having a centralized installation, being able to put it on a web server someplace, getting lots of people to connect to the same instance and use it, all the flexibility and deployment options, the fact that all of our actual exploits are open source, all the backend is basically open, all of our APIs are open, all the code is basically visible, so if you have Pro, you can just go look at the code. In general, that's what's really selling us right now. We're getting some stronger demand in enterprise that's requiring bigger scalability, fancy reporting, different compliance stuff, but right now we don't have that many problems selling at Core these days just because it's kind of a no-brainer for a lot of folks who've already used Core, what the differences are and why this is actually a much better solution for a lot of them.
And we'll leave the rest of that to some of the marketing guys as well and the sales guys. But you mentioned some things about reporting, and somebody was asking if your reports carry your own severity rating, or is it an industry standard? Can you discuss that a little bit?
We took a strange approach to severity ratings, which is if we owned it, it's severe. Otherwise, it's not. So it's a very binary reporting approach right now. We're probably going to get dragged into doing severity ratings and risk ratings and all that stuff going forward, just because we want to bring in data from all these other products as well. So right now, Metasploit Pro is very binary. It's like, did I get into your machine? If so, yes, you're owned. You're done. It's severe. And at that point, it's up to you to basically change the criticality of a host, change the risk of the host, and so on. We really see Nexpose as the product within Rap7's kind of portfolio that does a lot of the risk analysis, risk rating, trending, that kind of stuff. And we've been trying to avoid having to basically duplicate that type of work. But as more and more people use Metasploit Pro as a way to import data from 4 or 5 different phone scanners, consolidate their data in one place, and to generate reports back out again, they really want to see more and more risk data. So at some point we have to bite the bullet and say, okay, we're going to do risk. Here's how it's going to work. We're in the middle of a bunch of conversations with the Nexpose team because they're focused on the same issues, of course, on their side to come up with a kind of a standardized risk rate we can use across all of our products. So we're thinking about it right now, but we don't do it today.
Okay. Other people are asking in regards to your reports, do you have any set or standard reports for compliance like PCI?
Oh, absolutely. We've got a PCI report which does all your standard mappings. This is pretty straightforward to demo here. Basically, we'll go through and look at various requirements to see whether anything that was found during the pen test actually contradicts those requirements. This is neat in that it's not just, did you install your patches or not, or did you do this or not, or do you have more than 2 services running or not, but it takes into account all the password data as well. So if it cracks a password and the password length is less than 7 characters, we fail the PCI requirement for password length. So it's kind of neat in that it will actually look at a lot of different things to show you the compliance against PCI. Let me pop over to the PCI report real quick. Here we go. So this is our PCI reports. This one isn't going to be too interesting because it's a very small test, but essentially you can see every single PCI requirement failed in this network. It's just because of the machines I scanned. Obvious ones here, one primary function per server. If you see a database and a web server in the same one, you failed that. Scrolling down to the bottom again, you can see there's a lot of other options down here related to credentials. So passwords have to contain both numeric and alphabetic characters, but since we cracked a password that didn't have either one, obviously that fails it. So administrator doesn't have numeric and alphanumeric. So it's a combination of all these various requirements related to password testing, related to patch testing. I'm not a PCI guru by any means, but we have some folks on staff who are, and they've been helping us drive what those reports cover and how they test it. So we've got the PCI reports, of course. We also have the FSMA report that was recently added. The FSMA report is pretty straightforward as well. It's mapping individual findings to controls, and it's a little bit more, to be honest, confusing just because the way that it's structured. Some of the sub-requirements aren't necessarily obviously tied to the major requirements, and anyways, there's a whole range on FSMA, but I won't go into it.
Okay. People have questions regarding installing Nexpose and Metasploit on the same box, or do you actually recommend keeping them keeping them separated?
If you have the resources for it, it's great. Just the resources do stack. So if you've got a machine with the 4 gig requirement for Nexpose, there's still a 2 or 3 gig requirement for Metasploit Pro as well, depending how big the network is. If you're trying to test like 10,000 nodes, you probably want to have a dedicated box just for Pro, just because it will eat up all that RAM, it will eat up all that CPU if it crunches on it. But in general, you can usually run them side by side. The other kind of hotspot there is core count. If your machine is 4 cores and you've got 6 gigs of RAM or something above 4, you're probably fine running both at once. Again, it comes down to how big your networks are for Pro and how big your networks are for Nexpose and what type of tasks you're running. If you're trying to do some 200 thread web app audit on the Nexpose side while you're doing a pen test in Pro, you may still run into either network card limitations or something else.
Okay, at this point, there's several other questions, but we're going to have to get going here pretty quickly. So just so everybody knows, even though there are a number of questions that we still haven't been able to get to, we apologize. But we will continue the Q&A live on the Ethical Hacker Network. So if you actually go to EHNet, and on the top right-hand side, you're going to see the webcast logo, and there will be a link to the article that announced the webcast. Right underneath that, right near the break, you're going to see that there's like a little cartoon bubble. If you look for that and click on it, there are extra questions that you can ask in our forums. And HD has been popping in on EHNet for a while now, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind going back and answering some of those additional questions that you may have. For those who are watching after the live event, we are going to update this slide deck so you can actually find exactly where the link is to ask some additional questions. And with that in mind, we just want to say thanks, and if you want to contact us, you can visit us at ethicalhacker.net or go to rapid7.com or, of course, metasploit.com. We want to thank you for joining us today, and hope you guys are liking these webcasts that we're doing on the Ethical Hacker Network, where we're bringing in some really great speakers on some really great tools and products, and hopefully we're keeping it a lot more technical and actually showing you what it can do to make you a better pen tester and not just giving a bunch of marketing fluff. But with that in mind, stay tuned to additional webcasts that we will have in the future. HD, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else you want to add?
I just want to say thank you to all the people who contribute to Metasploit and keep making it great. So we know we're a commercial sell at this point, but we're still very focused on open source, and we want to make sure that's clear to our users.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And do you want to mention anything about being in Vegas or anything that people can do to either check out what you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're if you're at Black Hat coming up next week, definitely drop by the booth. We have lots of fun demos. We've got David Kennedy and some other folks doing book signings, things like that. They're giving out some free books. So if you want to see more demos, you want to ask any questions, we'll be around there basically all next week. I'm going to be at B-Sides on Thursday giving a talk about what's so far called Something Awesome, which is a combination of about 9 different topics at lightning speed. So if you want to hear about the latest thing that happened in Warvox 2, the latest thing happening with some of the other fun projects I'm working on, I'm going to cover a whole lot of content there during that presentation. And again, if you're in Vegas and we run into each other, let's grab a drink. So see you guys in Vegas. Thanks.
Cool. Any quick little information about a Rapid 7 party at Black Hat?
Our party is the night of the 3rd at the top of the Palms Tower. Or sorry, the top of the Palms Playboy Tower, which is where the club called Moon is. So if you want to get into the party, just email your reps and sales rep, and they'll basically set you up an invite. So that's it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. HD, I'll see you next week in Vegas, and hopefully I'll see a bunch of you guys in Vegas as well. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.